Well, hello there, humans, hippies, earthlings, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and whoever you're lucky enough to be doing it to. I'm Bushka on Blitz, and I'm lucky enough today to be doing it in the KpfPz 70, otherwise known as the Main Battle Tank 70, or MBT 70 for short. I called it Lucky Phil in the review. You can call it late for lunch. I don't mind, as long as you know what I'm talking about when I give you the info. Now, I did a review that is up on the Asia server portal about this tank, but it was a test server review. And as always, it's very, very hard to draw strategic conclusions when you're facing bots. Although some may say that some of the play on the servers these days is very bot-like indeed, but they would be cynical people, and that is not who I am, and it's not who you are. We are people who believe that the glass is half full. We're the optimists of the world, and we come here today to have a chat about how this tank can optimistically be the best it possibly can be. I'm also going to talk to you about the weak points of the tank, what it does well, in other words, what it does poorly, and how I think you should be playing it to do the very best. Now, to do that, I'm going to show you a couple of snippets of film to show you where it does well. I'm going to show you a very, very intense breakdown of the armor profile filmed on the live server as well. I'm going to show you a game that I did very well in it, a couple of games, and a couple of situations where it did very, very poorly. Now, the gun on this thing is what gets everyone talking straight away, because it does have the highest alpha damage of any tier 9 heavy. And that's saying something, because you do get the 120mm starting to pop up at tier 9. So you get some of those tanks like the VK4502B, for instance, who get a 460 alpha shot, which is great, which is a 120mm. But the KpfPz 70, or Lucky Phil, has a very, very odd gun. It's got a rocket launcher slash standard conventional weapon that's 150mm, but has a 560 standard alpha. So get your head around that straight away. Your alpha on your standard APCR round is 560. Now, where this tank really excels is hull down. It is a hull down nightmare for other tanks to deal with, because it has a great combination of low profile and strong turret armor. Now, the armor is not like, say, a T29 or a T32 or a T34, where it's really, really over the top strong and pretty much impervious. It's more like a cross between those tanks and, say, a Centurion 7-1, which has fairly strong armor, but it can also be penned if you hit it in the right place. And I'm going to break down why that is the case. The tank that surprisingly this really reminds me of is an Object 140. And you'll see when I actually do the armor profile exactly why that's the case. Plus, it has 7 degrees of gun depression. 6 degrees, rather. Not 7. I wish it had 7 degrees of gun depression. And that means it's exactly the same in terms of gun depression as the 140. So I got the feeling that a lot of the places where I did well in the 140, I did really, really well in this tank. Where it doesn't do so well is as a bit of a lone wolf. You can see I pushed up here to support our 2 mediums, and one of our mediums went a little bit too aggressively, and the other one, the STB1, you can see down there in the bottom right hand corner of the minimap, just basically running away. So I got left on my own and isolated. Now, this is where this tank does very, very poorly. It's good in set positions. When you can get it to somewhere that's possibly a good hull down position, like the mounds of rubble on Himmelsdorf or the mounds of rubble on Middelburg, which I used very, very well in the last game you're going to see that we play, or some of the berms on all kinds of different maps. It's excellent, but it has very, very poor armor on its lower glacis, a lot like a Ascent or a T34, and it has horrible gun depression, which means when you get pushed on, quite often if you're on these little ridges and things, which is where you try to get to protect your turret, you have a very, very hard time getting the gun to actually get to shots. And while you are fairly mobile for a heavy tank, you are not a touch on a medium, especially like a Leo 1. And if someone decides to push on you while you're on a reload, well, you're in big trouble, because your damage per minute numbers are abysmal. The DPM on the tank, while it's not off the charts horrible for a tier 9 heavy tank, is really bad when you get matched up against tier 9 mediums, tank destroyers, and anything in tier 10 that's a medium. Like a Leo will do 3.5k as its pure DPM. And that's important for Leo because it gets more opportunity to put that into action. You're going to do 2,100 damage per minute, which is so low. And when you get up tiered against tier 10 tanks, everyone on the battlefield has a higher damage per minute number than you do. Like, it's just legit. Like, the E75 has that massive armor profile, and so does the VK45, but both those guys do about 2260 damage per minute. You are still lower than them, and you don't have the amazing side scraping ability of those tanks. And you're not an autoloader like an AMX 5120, which, like those guys, has lower end DPM, but has it all in burst. So you've really got to consider this tank to be quite unique. Now, it is good enough to deal with the tier 8s of this world that want to push up and get around you. You're generally mobile enough to keep them at arm's length, and unless they do very, very well or are very, very lucky indeed, you're going to be a just Jim Dandy. And your traverse numbers are good for a tier 9 heavy anyway. Well, they're not amazing, but they're better, say, than an E75 or a VK4502B or an ST1, who are the real big heavy tanks. And surprisingly, you're even better than the Conqueror. You're also just about the same as an AMX 50 120 and an M103 and an IS-8. You're all at 28 degrees. You're at 27, they're at 28. But they're mobile heavies in terms of traverse. And what you're going to find is in situations like this, where you can't really side scrape and get hull down, you're still fast enough to duck out, take shots, and pull back, which is really, really interesting. Because that means you can get your 150mm random gun that does 560 alpha into the game, and you can become a very, very effective peekaboo heavy. Now, a peekaboo heavy is exactly what you want to be playing, and you have huge variance on this weapon as well. It's one of the crazy things that I found when I was playing this tank was the variance on your gun is enormous. Your standard shell damage has a 280 alpha variance, 420 to 700. To put that in a little bit of perspective, the variance on the 128mm of the VK4502B is 345 to 575. So you're going from 420 to 700, which is a 280 alpha variance, which is quite a bloody lot. So you'll see shots where you do 450 and you're like, well, that sucked. And then you see shots where you do 650 and you think like you're absolutely killing it. And that little bit of mobility coupled with a little bit of armor means that you can sneak out and duck around and get shots in. And even though you're going to take one, you make them pay for it. Like, look at the variance on that, 645 damage. Now, here we go. Let's have a look at the armor profile, because this is really important. You can see this is from the Centurion 701. Now, the numbers on this tank are 255mm on your APCR, which is very, very good, 300mm on your heat, and 210 on your HESH, which is your high explosive. And I just wanted to use this to highlight a couple of key things. The turret is actually very, very strong, and that area to the left is hard to pen. But this area on the right is a huge issue, and you need to try and set up your tank so that that is not visible, or at least if it's visible, it's very, very hard to get a key shot on. So you're not the kind of turret where you want to be sitting still. You want to be moving the turret all the time, backwards and forwards, jiggling and wiggling. That hatch or port next to the gun there is not a reliable pen. It really, really isn't. Now, the hatches on top can be penned, but you've got to remember this gun that I'm using right now is 0.29 dispersion with 255mm of pen at tier 9. This is as good as you're going to get in terms of a tier 9 gun on anything outside of your TDs for penetration, and anything outside of, say, well, there's nothing else really that's much more accurate than this. This is the business. So you can see how difficult, even with heat, the turret is to pen. It's no guarantee. So it's actually a little bit stronger than I thought it would be, the turret, albeit those weak points are particularly terrible. But the lower glacis, as you can see here, is terrible. Let's talk about the simile I used with the Object 140. See that? This is how you would drive a 140. You would come out from the side of a berm, like you can see on the right-hand side of the screen there, that rubble mound. and you'd show that angled upper glacis with a reasonably strong turret, and you'd never let them see that weak part, which is on the right-hand side of the tank there, and you definitely don't want to be penned from the rear or side because you're HE pennable, absolutely. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to drive it like a 140, and this is how you want to be using this tank behind rubbles and mounds. Here we go. Now, this is another surprise. Have a look at this. I couldn't get that to pen reliably at all. There is an area underneath the turret there that you can pen, but the sides of the tracks, even with 255 and angled up like this, are not the easy pennable areas you'd think they would be. But that area just under the turret can be penned, and I'm going to show you that in a sec. That area at the back looks to be clear, but it is not. It is not a 100% guaranteed pen. It's the same with that little area right next to the gun. It looks like an easy pen, but it's just not. Sometimes it'll go in, but usually it won't. And that was a real surprise to me. But if you want to drive it like a 140, angle it up about 30 degrees, 25 degrees, and then you pop out, and you can see the upper glacis becomes a more difficult pen, and using APCR with 255 millimeters of heat of pen, there you go. That's where you are. That's the angle you want to be using. You're hiding, you're keeping the mount on your left, you're hiding that very, very big weak point, you're moving backwards and forwards so it's hard to pen the top of the hatch, and you're maximizing your armor profile. And that's the armor profile in a nutshell. Sure, if they go to heat or they're tier 10 tanks, they may well be able to get through there, but even with 255 millimeters of pen, which is as good as you're going to see on a tier 10 medium too, by the way, unless they go to heat, you're very, very difficult to pen. And occasionally you will get penned through that thing. You'll see I'll get one through there. It's just the way it goes. The other thing to remember is you've only got 6 degrees of gun depression. Now, I'm going to abuse that in this brawl here, this stoush that I have at the front against that other MBT-70. Phil, Lucky Phil's going to be up there. You can see a low roll there. You're really looking to get that mid-5s alpha out all the time, but it just doesn't happen. You get such big variances. You're more likely to get a 400 or a 600 than you are to get a 580. There you go, just sub 500 on that one, but they're big shots, and it's peek-a-boom time. Between reloads, you're like an E100. You're hiding. You're like a Death Star. You're hiding, and you're using that turret to get shots without exposing too much of your lower glacis. Sometimes you'll want to get a shot in and you'll expose it, but usually you won't. Looking for a shot into the side, 557. Still a little bit under your average alpha, and then you'll get your 650 and you'll feel much better about yourself. And in between shots, you're just not visible. That's all there is to it. You don't want to. Now here comes, surprisingly, another Lucky Phil. He's a little bit above me, which is interesting. I'm going to get a shot off. Now the dispersion on the gun is not very, very spectacular at all. Just so you know, you're looking at about 0.367 with all the bells and whistles on it. But the lower glacis is 600 alpha, so you know it's really swings and roundabouts. I'm going under, and he simply cannot get the gun down far enough to hit that weak lower glacis effectively. He's at a long reload, so I know I'm pretty safe here ducking up. Again, we're rolling low, but we're not in a DPM fight here. Again, he just can't get the gun down. He's got to shoot the turret because we're underneath him. It's like fighting, think of it as fighting something like an IS-8 or an Object 140, and I completely stuffed that. That's all my fault. Nothing to do with the gun there. That is completely me going for the lower glacis when, because it's such a sharp lower glacis, you're actually better off just going for it as a normal shot. And there we go, we switched back up. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So when you're fighting these things, and if you're below them, it's going to be very, very tough for them to get the gun down. And if you've got a strong turret, that is a real tough gig for a Panzerkampf or one Panzerkampf 70 to deal with. Now, 0.367 is an amazing dispersion, but it's not terrible by any stretch of the imagination. And I found too that I didn't want to be in situations where I was really sniping with it, but I also didn't want to be in situations where I was always on the front line. What I wanted to do was basically work off a platoon mate, and the most successful platoon mates I had were, I had Mojo running another MBT-70, and I had Perfidious Albion running the ST-1. When I was running with another one of these tanks, we were able to swap backwards and forwards between big alpha shots and time it hull down so that we could go out, go hull down, shoot. And if they moved up, they were always going to have someone who was on a reload and able to pump them. And that made the tank way more effective. You don't really want to be in situations where you're left on your own. Now, I've pushed low here. The reason I'm pushing so hard is the team's with me, and there is, much like you saw in Himmelsdorf at the start, there is a mound up there that I can use to go hull down and move straight out and forward. Now, I'm going to end up with pretty much the entire team against me, and I'm going to rush a couple of shots here, but I do really well. And one of the reasons I do really well is I'm spotting all my own damage, and I've got a lot of support behind me, and that's going to allow me to come out and basically use the gun when I need to use the gun, and I just pull back and reset camo otherwise. Now, the tank's also pretty sexy to look at. I find it to be very, very attractive. I'm going to side scrape up here. Now, surprisingly, it's not as bad at side scraping as I thought it would be. I really thought it would be an ineffective side scraper because the side armor on the tank is not that great. Like, the sides is 90 millimeters, but it's only a very, very thin strip, and then you've got the tracks and things here. So it's not a good side scraper, but it can hold its own in a pinch against same tier competition. If you try and side scrape this thing against the Panzer 100s, you're going to get wrecked. That's all there is to it. But it can effectively do it if you know what you're doing. The other thing it does, because it's so... It seems pretty nippy for a tier 9 heavy with this much armor, and because it's so low to the ground, you can really make hay with that peekaboo, and you can move around. Now, we missed this shot here. Pretty derpy, actually. Very poor shot. But you're going to see I'm in a situation here where everyone's going to be pushing forward. I'm going to be trying to reset my camo, stay hidden, and only pop out and leverage this open area here into shots. So, hang on, there's a waffle tractor. Now, the HE on this is not amazing. It's really, really good. Don't get me wrong, it is very, very good. But it's not 150mm HE, so it's not the 960 HE damage you're going to get on a standard 150 gun, like on the 150 you get on the Waffle or the Borsig or the BL10 or, you know, the E3, any of those things. It's 640 alpha, which is the standard AP alpha on a 150mm gun. So there you go. That's because, obviously, if they put that on this heavy tank, I think it would be overpowered. It would be tremendously overpowered. I would drive this thing all day long. As it was, I had a pretty successful run with this thing when I was taking it seriously and running it properly. But it's also the kind of tank where it will punish you for overextending and being caught alone. You want to really be leveraging off your platoon mates and your teammates here. And you can see... great side shots into there, 583, lots of nice damage. And then we pull back, looking around, always keeping an eye on where the enemy is, because you don't want to give them side shots. That E75 is basically committing to getting blown the hell up. Waffle, I wasn't going to shoot him, but the Waffle tracked him instead of killing him. So then we move out there. It's 3 on 4, and you can see it moving around really, really sinuously here. It looks lovely. Long reload is a bit of a punish, but we get there, we get it done. We stay with the APCR. There was no need to go for the HE there, even though we could have penned the back. The HE pen is 90mm, which is brilliant. That is really good HE pen. You're not as good as, say, the Hesh firing Conqueror at tier 9, but apart from that, you've got the best HE pen on any tier 9 heavy tank. And it shouldn't be forgotten. This is a 1700 hit point tier 9 tank. Now, that was a poor shot on my part. That's not the tank's fault. You know, 240mm a pen on your AP, 305mm a pen on your heat. So, right up there, and quick enough again where you can see we're more mobile than that VK4502B. We're able to get around behind him, do the business, and follow him very, very easily. Now, this was the only mastery game I had in this, and it wasn't my highest damage game. I actually think the fact that I did spot 3 tanks and got about 1400 assisted damage because I was right at the front and I was pushing the line along with the 4K I did myself was what got the mastery across the line. But look, if I have to summarize and conclude what I really love about this tank, it's the gun and the mobility. It really does feel more mobile than I gave it credit for on the test server. And I think that's because some of the other tier 9 heavies are particularly slow to move. It doesn't do so well when up tiered, when its primary mover, the gun, with its big alpha, comes up against competition that can take that kind of hit and then deal back bigger, nastier numbers. But for all that, it competes. Is it overpowered? Absolutely not. Is it good? I think it is. I think it's a good tank. Is it fun? Hell's yes. And that being the case, mate, I give it 2 thumbs up. If you're looking for a reason to do this event and to grind the event, this tank is it. Look after yourselves, boys and girls. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed a really good in-depth look at Lucky Phil. Until next time, I'm Bushka on Blitz. Look after your families, be nice to each other, and stay safe on the battlefield.